Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mentoring with Geraldine and the Bite Size Podcast. And today I have the most amazing Moira Bradfield with me, and she really has squeezed in a bit of time. She's doing her PhD at the moment. And so I managed to wrangle just this tiny bit of time to find out what she's up to and for her to tell us all about her amazing course, which I have done. And it was great. It's definitely not anything out there that is the same or similar. I can totally recommend. I'm going to put that right at the beginning of this podcast because we're just going to talk about all things vagina. So I'm not sure where you are currently, listeners. So you might want to pop your headphones in if you're in the car or you're on the bus or something and everybody's listening, because we're going to be talking all things vagina right now. And the testing, and Moira's got a webinar coming up. So we've got tons to talk about. So thank you very much for coming on the show, Moira.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So with your, how did you get into the area of, all things vagina? What dragged you to this? We all have a why and we all have, a focus and a niche, but what dragged you to this niche in particular?
Yeah, I think I was wandering aimlessly like many practitioners for a while there and had a very general practice. And in that, obviously, you never know what's going to walk through your door. And I had a run of clients who had vaginal issues. And what I found was what I applied didn't work. And I was frustrated. So I went, well, what do I not know about this area? And when I went digging, I didn't know a lot. And so what opened up, and because we've got obviously more and more research coming out in all different areas of health, but what opened up was a whole new microbiome for me, and understanding that on a very physical level initially took me into different realms. And what I realized is that we can't necessarily address this area independently from the rest of the body. And we need to also consider that killing things is not necessarily the answer either. I think there's a tendency to go, just hit that with an antimicrobial and everything will be fine. So that's where it all started. And I never dreamed that it would become my niche, but the more I dug into it, the more clients I attracted. And obviously what I realized as well is more and more practitioners also didn't know what they were doing in this area. And having a long history in education, it was a very natural leap for me to also take that into the realms of education for other practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, I know as a practitioner, there was nothing until you came out, and it was a real struggle. I would have people in and I would be trawling through all of the research. And of course, when I started, a lot of that research was still on paper and it wasn't, out there on the internet. But there also weren't the forums, there weren't people talking about it. So it was really hard to find the information that you needed. So you were an absolute godsend when it came, is simple things. Candida, who knew? There were so many types. Who knew that you had to do so many different things? So, and all of the different possibilities of the things you can use. You do have a huge Facebook group. I mean, there's 2,500 people in that Facebook group. And I will put the link in the show notes to the Facebook group if you're not in it, practitioners. It is a practitioner group. And then you have your courses. And then now something that has changed is testing. We didn't have any testing before, really. We had a basic swab or that's a bit gunky, must be candida, the visual and the smell, and that was about it. So now there's a really good lot of microbiome testing out there for the vagina. Can you just very quickly tell us what's available and what, because I know you've got a course coming out about it because it's so new. Do you want to talk us through it a bit?
Yeah, I think I want to start by saying that those other tests still have relevance, and nothing beats a good case history, because interpreting any of these things, including basic cultures and microscopy and microbiome panels, requires you to understand your patient and their symptom patterns, so that you can understand the relevance, because the microbiome needs to be considered as a whole thing rather than micro-focusing in on one thing, and trying to move or eradicate it. So those are things that the cultures and swabs I still use a lot of in clinic, and they're a great first point to understand if there's anything really imminent that needs to be addressed and targeted. But then we have the ability now to look at whole microbiome panels, or to look at panels that might be picking and choosing specific microbes that are common problem makers within vaginal health or also associated with patterns of health. things like lactobacillus microbes, for example. To have a lot of those usually means that your microbiome is in good shape. So what my goal around educating as well with microbiome panels is, again, is understanding the relevance of it, because, you know, we don't want to kill everything. This is an ecosystem, and just like any ecosystem, the low level microbes are just as important as the high level microbes. And that if you start manipulating it without knowing what's going on, then you run the risk of causing long-term damages that are unpredictable, and, you know, environmental disasters essentially. So we need to have that perspective on it. So in what we are intending to do in the December webinar for the microbiome panels is sort of talk people through the available testing, because globally there are different panels and they each have pros and cons associated with them. We have different forms of technology. We have 16S, we have, you know, whole next generation sequencing using metabiome and things like that. And then you can also use quantitative PCR and still use culture-based methods, and different microbes and have different relevance when you're using different methods. So we understand what we're looking at, what the test that you're looking at, what its perhaps strengths and weaknesses are. And so therefore, you know, if things don't change or if you're not seeing what you're expecting, because I think that's also important to, before you get a microbiome panel back, you need to already have an idea of what you think you might be able to see, because it needs to confirm what you're clinically making assumptions around, and what your differential process is clinically as well. And then that will help you make decisions around treatment and or, you know, prescription, and how that person can actually manage that condition as well. And like any microbiome, it goes through fluctuations. So a test is only a snapshot of time, you know, and so you need to also think about how that might change and what influences would cause that to change as well.
Yeah, in your course, you've got a number of cheat sheets, because as you've just said, you know, you're looking at differential diagnosis and you're looking at everything that's going on. And so I think I've got one of your cheat sheets on my wall just over there. There we go. Clinical differentiation of vaginal disorders. I've got one from your course. So from one of your courses, I've got a number of things on my pinboard, and that's one of them. And because these cheat sheets are great, because we go through, we take that case, we find out about our client, we find out about all their symptoms, we do all of those things, and then we make that assumption, don't we, in our heads. But it's great sometimes to know, you know, you do the testing and you know, hey, I got it all right. Or you do the testing and you go, I did not know that was going to happen, that was going to be there as well. And I mean, stress can make things worse for people. There's all sorts of, you know, what am I trying to say here? There's all sorts of things that can make somebody's problem worse, such as stress, but there's things that we can do to make them better, and actually being able to target it properly through a good breakdown of the case and a good understanding of the client's problem, and then having this knowledge behind us. Because I mean, the majority of the population, you know, are women. And we all have a vagina, and so we're all likely to, you know, have a problem at some point in our life. And so knowing that there's a system out there, you know, there's training out there to help us to deal with it, and there's people like yourself who are studying this area. I can't believe you're doing a PhD. I'm so impressed, and I've got Moira the Brains on my podcast. I love it. Because I mean, it's so hard. How are you fitting in studying for a PhD, doing your PhD and running your practice? I know that you're online now, so you've given up your room for the time being up on the Gold Coast, but you work online. How do you fit in all the education, the research, the PhD, and the clients? How are you getting it all in there?
Yeah, probably I mean, I'm managing it. It's probably not overly healthy at times, I think, and I notice that and draw back on it. Sometimes I wish I had one of those timekeeping devices that Hermione has in Harry Potter, where I can replicate myself. But sadly,
go back and do it again.
I don't. You know, in terms of my clinical practice, I have quite set times where I work on that, and I am a full-time PhD student, so that is where the majority of my time is allocated, and that's where, you know, that is preferential to everything. And that something changes there, I have to be able to reschedule and drop everything to meet the PhD demand, and because that was the commitment I made. And that's the other thing, is I just keep reminding myself that I chose this and that the outcome is something that I wanted. So I can't be resentful of that process either, because that type of study is hard and, you know, and has its challenges associated with it. So segmenting time is important, and being a full-time student, I'm also limited to how many hours I can actually work formally as well, which is also very good to stick to that for me. So I have an online clinic. I do a majority of my client-based hours are Friday, and then I also will see people after hours on one day of the week. So I have a very short clinic one evening, which allows me to also see people globally, because timeframes are different, and that works in with my life, because then my days are uni based, and apart from Friday, which is a clinic day. So, and then I've become much more time efficient in terms of doing everything I do in the consultation. And that comes obviously with practice and many years in clinical practice of being able to make those sorts of decisions and not needing to necessarily go back to the drawing board with research. And part of my the privilege, I think, of doing the type of study that I'm doing is that I'm immersed in the subject matter anyway. So I'm always having access to that information and put that in practice clinically. And as we progress in my research, then that also informs my clinical practice as well.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, there's the very real prospect of overwhelm for all of us as clinicians. Having a niche and knowing your market and only working with that market means you are always on top of the research. You're always, you know, ready with the answer in most of the cases, or at least you know where to look for the answer if you haven't got it on the tip of your fingers. And when we think of the new graduate, it's always hard to choose that niche. But women's health is, at the end of the day, one of the biggest areas within natural health, because women will seek out support from a natural therapist when they're not getting anywhere with their doctor. So it's great that we're there for our clients, but overwhelm is huge. And so we talk about overwhelm a lot. I've been talking with a number of practitioners about overwhelm and how they deal with it. And you've got a number of hobbies. I thought you might like to share those while we're on here, because you've got two amazing little doggies. I mean, you've got a son as well. He's not a hobby. Children aren't hobbies. But you have got some very cool hobbies. So you make sure that you are having time away from your PhD, time away from your business, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, as an individual, I have a tendency to fatigue. That is my weak spot. If I ever am going to go down, that's where I go down. And so I'm very mindful of how I moderate that. And I get up very early. Our house is an early rising house, so we're up by 5. And sometimes that means that I do work in the morning, but it also means at nighttime I don't do work unless there's an absolute deadline. And that's when I take the time out to spend time with my family on a weekday. I have hobbies, arts and crafts are my outlet. I think creativity, I've always been a creative person, and being in a very academic track at the moment, there's little time for that and everything has to be so evidence-based. And so I take time out to paint and do some very nana things like crochet and, you know, whatever really needs doing, because that's how I relax, essentially, is to, you know, get my hands dirty. And then there is a lot of TV watching, I'm not going to lie, as well. Sometimes it just requires lying supine on a couch and, you know, tracking through some vampire drama. So I think that, you know, we need to be okay with that as well. Like, the rest can come in different forms, and it doesn't all have to be ticking things off a list. I've meditated today, I've had a bath today, I've taken a walk today. You know, that can be very spontaneous, and sometimes you do fall down, and that's okay. But yeah, hobby wise, it's more creative for me than anything. And I mean, you know, exercise is obviously important for all of us. And I've recently, in the last year, gone back to adult ballet.
Oh wow, there we go.
After 20 years of not being a ballet dancer, I think when I went into practice, when I first started, after I graduated, I'd stopped being a ballet dancer, and I've gone back to it, and it's amazing what muscle memory can do. But it's also a very telling habit to let you know where your body's at age-wise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So
I can't imagine doing that. I think I did a week at ballet, and I think my daughter did a week at ballet, and I think that was it. And I can't imagine at all going back to ballet. So congratulations. I mean, we all exercise. I do Pilates. I'll put it down there. Ballet dancers do Pilates, don't they? So, hey, I'm kind of a ballet dancer in my own way, sort of not. But so what I'm trying to make sure everybody out there understands is you're doing a PhD. You've got this amazing business, but you've been in practice for how long?
20 years, I think.
20 years, so 2 decades of being in practice. So over that time, you've developed your systems. When we started out, everything was on paper. We were handing out pieces of paper to everyone. We had to write every piece of paper ourselves. Now there's lots of resources, like all of your resources and your courses and everything else. So the pieces of paper are all made for us to hand out, which is just amazing. It's easy to find things online. We don't have to go through books anymore, or our books are online as well. So that's great. You can just search within a book and it comes up with however many times you've put it in. So but what I really want to get across to everybody listening is don't forget that downtime. Don't forget that even though you're as busy as, you will eventually be as an amazing practitioner as you are. And but it takes time. And it takes time to develop those practices and those systems. But remember your boundaries, and remember that downtime that you need, that relaxation that you need, and to do other things. So, but some of the other things, of course, they can do is your upcoming webinar. So tell us a little bit about the webinar before we go. So that's on the December the 15th. So Wednesday, the December the 15th. So what's that about?
So the webinar in December is interpreting vaginal microbiome panels. So it's sort of a crash course, if you like, because of this explosion of panels available to us in what I perceive to be the most important things to remember when you're looking at a vaginal microbiome panel, and how you need to relate that to case history, and what that might mean for an individual, because we're dealing with obviously people that have vaginas, but that can be very diverse as well. And we know that in vaginal microbiome health, there are different profiles that constitute healthy, and some of them on paper don't look that healthy, even if they are. And so we need to be able to recognize that as well. So it's going to take participants through, the process of ordering, of choosing what is available and what their pros and cons are, and also what that means clinically, how to utilize those results clinically, and have perspective, essentially, is my key, I think, takeaway for that.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, I'm excited for that. So everyone, in the show notes, you will find the link to book into that and to find out more about Moira's courses and how to do her, how to join Vagiversity, as it's called now. And but I'd just like to say thank you so much, Moira, for joining us today. It's been absolutely brilliant having you on. And thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Anytime.
Well, we might just have you back.